Welcome to the Culture Encounters podcast. I am your host, Chad Ownby, and today is a very special episode of the Culture Encounters podcast. We're going to take a little break from Ownby at the movies, although I hope you're enjoying it. And today we are going to have a very special conversation where we sit down with Mr. Divine Agodzo, who is a professor in Canada. We're going to discuss his life. We're going to discuss his experiences. And let's just forget me talking. Let's get right on into it. Hey, Divine, how are you doing today?
Well, Chad, nice to be on your program.
Thank you for having me, or thank you for being here. Yeah, it's a pleasure. So, how was your day? Let's just start there. You having a good day? It's currently at the time of recording. It's 5 o'clock my time. I think about 3 o'clock your time, right? A little after 3.
Yes, we're on the Pacific Coast. It's a great day today, actually. Sunny day and warm, and the weather is picking up. I definitely am enjoying it today.
Wonderful. That's amazing. It is a little bit more chilly here, but not too bad here in Virginia, where I am. Virginia is weird. We don't really, our seasons don't make sense. We have really hot summers and then moderate fall, and we used to have cold winters. Now, not so much anymore. We kind of just have moderate winters. Then we almost felt like springtime a week ago, and then last week or 2 weeks ago, and then last week it got really cold again. So
Unpredictable weather. It's
very,
everywhere.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy. It's very unpredictable. So
I tell
let's get
you,
into.
yeah, we got a lot of rain here though, so you might not like it here either. So
We need it. We need it. I was just looking at all the lawns. It rained here yesterday, but other than that, it had been a minute. So let's get into your story. So talk to me a little bit about your academic history. What brought you to Canada, and ultimately, what are you doing there now?
So, I was born in Ghana. Ghana is in West Africa. And in Ghana, I did study journalism, worked for a while in the field of journalism. My first job in journalism was working as a staff writer for a Christian magazine at the time called Truth and Life magazine. Did that for a bit and then decided to move on and to travel to Canada to explore new opportunities. So I arrived in Canada in 1997. Came in as an international student to study journalism to sort of build on my skills in journalism. So I took another degree in journalism at Concordia University in Montreal. So from 97 to 2000. I was an international student. Then following that, I did some freelance journalism in Canada, but then thought maybe I might do a shift to the field of public relations. Now, public relations is somewhat related to journalism, but it involves taking the skills of a journalist and working within the organization as opposed to being outside the organization. So it's basically the same skills, but working more in areas like speech writing and writing newsletters and content for the organization. So I did that for a few years, and then the call of academia came to me. I've always loved teaching. I didn't mention the fact that while I was in Ghana, I did some teaching at the primary level, just like you, Chad. Did some of that. I enjoyed that really well. So I began to get a sense. Probably it's about time to take my skills and my interest and my experience both in journalism and public relations into teaching. So I did that transition. Worked on a graduate degree, and then over the last 4 years, I've been working at Trinity Western University, which is in Langley. Langley is in the province of British Columbia in Canada. So that's what I've been doing for the last several years.
Wonderful. So was when you transferred or when you came to Canada from Africa, from Ghana, was it like part of an exchange program that the university had, or how in general, how was college and university different in Canada versus in Ghana?
So I came in as an international student, so I came on my own dime.
Oh, okay.
It was quite an adventure, and I really, I mean, you've got to commend students who come from all over the world who
Yeah.
basically go into a new country with. I knew nobody. Like I was, I had some knowledge of Canada just by reading books and history and all of that, but I was entering into a totally new cultural environment. So yeah, I went through the typical experiences, what you might call culture shock. I like to say I mine wasn't as much culture shock as culture surprise, because it I was okay, but there were things that were quite different, right? Beginning from even something as basic as the weather. I mean, you would think that'd be something you might not consider a big change, but it was, because when I arrived in Canada at the time, I flew into a historic ice storm that's still one of the most significant weather events at the time. So it was called the Great Ice Storm of
Oh my
1998.
gosh.
Yeah, yeah. So those heavy snow, heavy ice, we lost power. I found myself actually moving out of my apartment into a shelter because that's everyone had to do that. The whole
Right.
university shut down for 2 weeks. Um, I think at that point I had to ask myself, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
Who lives here? But after that, it could only get better because um, the weather obviously was that particular weather incident was one out of was just extraordinary. But yeah, so there were lots of changes for me. Um, one of the bigger changes probably has to do with this, and I'll give you an example from my student days. I grew up in a country, in a culture where um, there is significant power distance between authority, right? So as a student, there were some expectations as to how you engage with your profs. Even at the university level, right? You would address them by their last names and prof and title, and you would show a great deal of respect to your profs. So I was flabbergasted to find students in my classroom talking to the prof in ways that frankly would have gotten me a spanking where I come from. So,
Right.
but anyway, so that was one change. But there's many other there are many other areas of adjustment as well. Probably just going through school and learning French. Oh yeah, I didn't mention that. Oh, that was tough. Learning French was a significant challenge. I mean, I grew up in Ghana, which is next door to Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. So there's some exposure to French, but very little. I mean, I took some French growing up in primary school, in high school, but then I had to take French at the university because it was required for my degree in journalism. I still don't ask me anything in French, but that was interesting as well.
Right. So, um, you've lived in Canada for at this point, from 1997, it's 2023 now, so
Yeah.
almost 30 years, give or take. Uh, has it created being in Canada for so long? Is there a cultural duality within you now? Being living in Canada for so long, but then not growing up in Ghana. What do you find that there's a duality of two or multiple cultures within you that you embrace both sides of, or multiple sides of yourself? And in what ways do you still continue to connect with the culture in Ghana while in Canada?
Good. That's an excellent question that I'm still wrestling with, because I'm trying to figure out where do I really belong, and I think that's an issue that many immigrants actually deal with is this
Right.
notion of I think some scholars have called it liminality, where you are in this liminal space where you're neither here nor there. So it has its own unique challenges, because especially when you have children who are, because I have two kids who are born here, so they're, they're fully Canadian, and so their experiences are a little bit different than mine.
Right.
But I came to Canada at a time when I'd acquired much of my heritage culture, right? So yeah, I do consider myself a little bit of a blend, multicultural.
Mm-hmm.
So one way to think about the outcomes of having lived in Ghana for so many years, and now living in Canada for this length of time, is that you create what you might call a third culture, which is neither fully and wholly Ghanaian or African, and neither is it Canadian either, right? It is a blend of both. And I do think it's actually, I mean, it has its unique challenges in that it's difficult to figure out where you really live and fit. I went back to
Yeah.
Ghana last over the Christmas holidays, and I enjoyed the time there. I connected with family, but there was a sense as well of, well, this is not as much of home as it used to be, which is just the reality you face, especially when you have children and family back in Canada. Now, and in Canada as well, you do recognize that you are also straddling this cultural bridge. So it can be challenging, but I would position it as actually an opportunity. And the reason I say that is that those of us who have this third culture background, immigrants, are able to see the world in a much more nuanced way than those who were raised wholly in one culture, right? So I'm able to, sometimes when we have these interesting conversations around cultural values and what to do, I'm part of the board of my church. And I think one of the assets of being who I am, being this multicultural individual, is that I'm able to see sometimes multiple sides of the issue in ways that I think that some might not be able to see. So for example, my culture is highly collectivistic, which means we think largely in terms of we versus not I. So
Right.
so people see themselves not, I mean, as individuals, but they position themselves largely within their community, so they think of the larger community. So it's a more collectivistic culture in that sense, and North America is highly individualistic, right?
Right.
So I I think I've become more open to individualism, having lived here for a while. But I retain the values of community. So I think I'm able to bring that into conversations and discussions in ways that probably might not be as clear to those who don't belong to these two groups, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
Right. And
so
that
so
makes
I
sense.
would
And
I
I
would
love.
position it as, I would position this third culture position as possibly an advantage for me, and even for organizations where if you're working in a situation where you are able to see issues from both a collectivistic and an individualistic frame.
Hmm.
You're able to bring in, you can understand values that are being brought into the workplace, and how you can work with people who were raised in different parts of the world and understand work differently, and maybe lead in much more inclusive ways.
That's wonderful, and I'm glad you brought that up because that is a struggle I think in North America in general is that idea of collectivism versus individualism, and at what point do we help everyone is one life more important than another one? And well, no, it's not. But you do find a lot of that kind of conversation of like, who should bear the responsibility to help everyone. And that's kind of where the debate in like different communities comes in, and it's a very, very spirited debate. Like, for example, one we have a lot of now is whose responsibility should it be to feed the children? Should it be the school's responsibility to feed children? Should it just be up to the families? Is it everyone? Is it no one? And you have these conversations, and they're meaningful because I think that it's important to kind of think about our values as people, where we come from. And I had never thought about the idea that uh it might be a little that I had never thought about that as a cultural shock, so to speak. um from our cultural surprise, so to speak, just how individualistic North America is in relation to other places. We think about it politically, but just like even socially, I had never really thought about it that way. That's incredibly
I'll
insightful.
give you one example. Maybe I'll give you an
Please,
example
please do.
from, and I'm part of a church that I am, active in, and I'll give you an example of the
Right.
celebration of Christmas.
Uh-huh.
Coming from a collectivistic culture, Christmas was seen largely in terms of, especially on a Sunday, whether Christmas fell on a Sunday or not, people went to church. Okay, and they went to church and they congregated as a community, and there was this sense that Christmas needed to be celebrated in the context of community, and for many people that meant church family,
Right.
right?
Right.
Now, in Canada, and I'm sure in the United States as well, you usually don't have Christmas services in church on whether it falls on Sunday or not. It's just not done. So what happens is families have their own, individual, not individual. I mean, it's still families, but there isn't that congregational celebration of Christmas. So in my church, there's a group of immigrants that were from India, and India is a collectivistic culture as well. And
Right.
so they organized a Christmas lunch brunch on Christmas Day. That had never been done before in this church because this church doesn't have that way of celebrating Christmas. And it was difficult for them to actually get this to happen because the church has been, predominantly Euro, cultural for a long time, and so it just wasn't in the thinking that Christmas could be celebrated that way. But it happened, and so and a lot of people surprisingly showed up.
That's great.
Came for this event, largely from collectivistic cultures who showed up because
Right.
they understood that, at least they had that sense of Christmas isn't something we do in our homes. Of course, you still go home and do your thing,
Sure,
but
sure,
but
sure.
but you do the church congregational celebration as well.
So you are just kind of transitioning your that was amazing. You are a professor of communication, is that right?
Yes, so I teach a variety of courses related to communication. Like I mentioned, my background is in journalism, so but I've gone beyond that to public relations, organizational communication, courses in media. I've taught
Okay.
some courses in media studies, as well as cross cultural communication, which actually is one of my areas of great interest right now is cross cultural.
So yeah, let's discuss that cross-cultural communication. What a maybe define and break down what that means for our listeners, and then also how has communication impacted your life as an immigrant and as an academic and just as a human being? And what messages would you give in terms of communication to someone who is an immigrant in Canada or anywhere now, when it comes to communication? And Also, what would you say? This was sorry, a multi-layered question, so I'll break it down. So, question one: how has communication impacted your life? Follow up to that: what does cross-cultural communication mean to you? Follow up to that: what message would you give to younger immigrants and people dealing with immigrants as far as communication goes?
Right. So cross-cultural communication is simply put communication across differences that make a difference. That's how I try to explain to my students. It's, we all have, we're different in many ways, right? But there are certain kinds of differences that impact communication
Right.
a bit more than other types of difference. So for example, commonly we think of differences in nationality as differences as a difference that makes a difference in communication, because someone from Cameroon speaks French, has different values, and then someone from Canada speaks English. And if you have these two individuals, one from Cameroon, one from Canada, engaging in communication, you'd expect that the differences in nationality would somehow impact, even at the most basic level, just the difference in language, right, would potentially impact the kind of communication they do. So it could pose difficulties to their communication. So cross-cultural communication is a study of how these differences play out, and also how to manage them. So, but it's not just differences between people who come from different countries, though, right? It's any difference that is significant enough that it might potentially impact the communication, situation. So, for example, cross-cultural communication includes, this is very interesting. It includes communication across generational divides. So if you have someone who's a baby boomer or older, citizen engaging with someone who's a Gen Z,
Right.
that is cross-cultural communication, because they're actually coming at it from two different cultural views of life, right? So that is an example of cross-cultural communication. Even communication between males and females has been viewed as cross-cultural communication, because there are some, differences in how men and women might engage in this thing we call communication. I mean, one theory says that men do a lot of report type communication, and then women do a lot of rapport type communication. So that's at the most basic level. Women can be more relational and connected, and even women's nonverbal communication is a bit more advanced than women can read faces and emotions better than men, in general. Again, these are generalizations, okay? So
Right.
there'll be some, but there's quite a good bit of research that suggests that. So cross-cultural communication is communication across difference, including religious differences too, right? So that's what we talk about, and we try and explain, sort of identify what those differences are, and sometimes it's differences in values, right? Differences in even a sense of what time, how we see time. That's a common one, right? Some cultures
Yeah.
have a very strict sense of time. 8 o'clock is 8 o'clock, right? And some cultures have a more flexible sense of time. Sometimes we joke and say, African time, Jamaican time, Indian time. It's not so much that these cultures don't respect time. Sometimes they would place the situation or the relationship or the context above the clock, right? So it's not just the clock that determines how a thing is done, but they might see it as based on just the relationship itself. So you might have a church service in some parts of the world that really go on forever, and no one wants to leave the church, and people preach for a long time, because in their view, the clock doesn't matter if you're having a good time. So you throw away the clock, right? It can mean so those are some variations in values that can cause issues with communication, and that need to be recognized and sometimes managed. So your other question was then how, what are some tips or what are some ideas um, for communication? Um, I like to think of communication, and partly because of my Christian background, I like to the Latin word for communication for is related to the word communio, and communio is actually the same. The word, it's the same word from which we have the idea of a communion, which if you're Christian, or we know is the Lord's Supper, is this ritual that brings people together to a table, and then they partake of fellowship. So I link communication with communio, and the idea of creating connection and and community, and of course, I'm a Christian, so I that's my picture of it, right? I see Christ as the one who bridges all divides and differences by his work, by his sacrifice. And so because of that, those that were separate are now brought together. Those that could not sit at the same table now sit at the same table, right? Those who had differences that seemed, differences that could not be reconciled, are now able to come together. So if that's the case, then communication is a powerful way to bridge differences. It doesn't mean that we I think we begin by recognizing the challenges of difference, and sometimes how we might have preferences for our kind, and for our values, and for how we see the world as the only way to see things. But good communication, or the ideal of communication, is to bridge those gaps, right? And as much as we can, bring people into fellowship, and into friendship, and into building community together, right? So that's how I'll frame it, and I can talk about specific tips for individuals as well, if you would like me to do that. And yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you. The main thing that you mentioned that really stuck out to me, and I kind of had like a light bulb moment, was you had mentioned like communion as ritual. Communication as a ritual was a really interesting way to think about it. Like, really communication is like the rituals that we do every day. And some every day, some not every day, but it does. Communication is a very ritualistic behavior.
It is.
The idea of trying to respect other people's rituals, and then accept and appreciate them, if they're different than our own, I think is an incredibly powerful message. And I think that if we look at if you break down communication as a ritual as well as like a science, I think that it's very interesting to kind of see how that those two things go together. This has been awesome. This has been incredible. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you today. I think it's been incredibly insightful. I thank you for sharing your story with us, and thank you for continuing to work in the world of academia. We need good people in academia at all levels. So thank you for paying it forward to the next generation, and lending a hand to help bridge those communication barriers. So again, thank you very much, Javine. We've loved having you today.
It's my pleasure, and thank you so much for having me on your show, Chad.
Absolutely, it's been a pleasure.